Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a great morning. We're excited to share with you something from the Word this afternoon. First of all, we want to say thank you to Bishop Leopold Thomas for this platform and opportunity to share with you in the Word. Just for a few moments, I want to turn your attention to 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter in the 7th verse. It's a very familiar text of Scripture. The King James Version reads like this: "For we walk by faith and not by sight." But I kind of like how the NIV puts it, says, "For we live by faith, not by sight." So just for a few moments, I want to talk to you from this thought, living above sea level. Yes, living above sea level. Certainly we are living in a time with all of this modern technology that you really cannot believe everything that you see, especially on the internet. People can have the ability to manipulate your picture and or video and make it look like something it is not. Yes, you can post a picture on Facebook today of you sitting in your living room, and someone can take your picture and make it look like you were sitting on the beach with a cocktail in your hand. Most everyone is using Zoom now because of the pandemic, working from home. And with the video feature in Zoom, you can change the background to make it look like any picture that you can download. So in this modern technological virtual reality advanced society, you literally cannot believe everything that you see. Yes, we used to be able to say, "I'll believe it when I see it," but everything you see can't be believed. The text today focuses on Paul as he explains what it means to live by faith rather than trusting in any other means. Those who are not born of God live by sight. In other words, they depend heavily upon the senses. They trust only that which they can see, feel, taste, smell, and hear. Those outside of the faith are highly empirical about life, meaning they rely on experience and observation alone. So they demand to see it, smell it, taste it, touch it, or even hear it in order to believe it. Yes, the person who walks by sight is the one who must see the miracle performed before he acts. Thus he must see the waters of the Red Sea roll up, taste manna in the wilderness, touch the hem of the Lord's garment, and hear the voice of God as a still small voice himself before taking action. Paul explains the nature of living by sight, noted that those who walk or live in this fashion usually find themselves worrying about success or failure in this life. They are overly occupied with the concerns of this life without observing that if anything happens to this body in this life, that God has another building not made with hands prepared for those who believe. I hope there are some believers watching with me this afternoon. Trusting only in what appeals to the senses, logic, and reasoning is not an indicator of trust in God. Because the God of the Bible declares, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." That's Isaiah 55:9. But on the contrary, those who live by faith are aware of physical influences and often use them. However, those who live by faith are not limited only to those experiences that appeal to sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. They consider visible things to be of small value because they pass away like a dream. But on the contrary, they account invisible things to be of high value because they will never, ever pass away. Whatever is invisible is eternal. The things that are not seen do not perish. That is why Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the things that are seen are temporary, but the things that are not seen are eternal. For we know that faith is the substance of things hoped for, but the evidence of things not seen. So today, there are many people who live at one level of faith or another. Our level of faith controls the depth of our involvements, commitments, and hopes. There are at least 3 comparisons of levels relevant to the subject. I'll call the first one the Dead Sea level. I'm told that the surface of the Dead Sea is at 1,312 feet below sea level. Yes, it's the lowest water surface on earth. It is fed by many small waters, but its main source of replenishment comes from the River Jordan, which empties 6 million tons of water every day into the Dead Sea waters. Even though it receives so much water, its level never rises more than 10 feet, and it has no outlets to empty water anywhere else. All the water that it receives from other sources is quickly evaporated or is made useless by its high salt content. Nothing lives in the Dead Sea. There is no fish, there is no algae, simply nothing, and that is why it's called the Dead Sea. But unfortunately, there are many today who live a Dead Sea existence. They are constantly striving to acquire, but no matter how much they acquire, they are not happy. Happiness seems to evade them. Nothing seems to satisfy them. No matter how much they drink, they always need another. No matter how much others try to love them, the love is never returned. It simply evaporates. They receive, but they never give back. Oh, you've heard of givers and takers. Well, they are the takers. I don't know about you, but I'd rather be a giver than a taker, because a giver always seems to have something to give, but takers can't always find victims to take from. The Dead Sea experience is a faithless experience. It represents a life that is lived outside of God. It considers its own passions. It considers its own desires. It considers only what appeals to its own sense of sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing. Too many can only see life on this level. They can only see that which can satisfy their own selfish passions. However, the walk of faith requires us to die to our selfish demands and walk in the newness of our faith in Christ. Jesus taught the disciples, recorded in Matthew 16:24 and 25, that in order to faithfully follow him, you must first deny yourself and take up your cross. That is the difference between membership and discipleship. Then there is the Mediterranean Sea level. The Mediterranean Sea represents Israel's feelings of inadequacy and fear. The Jews were not a seafaring people. They could not even describe themselves as a seafaring people. Their nation had most of its origins in desert wanderings. Their efforts at seafaring usually ended in failure. Their fear of the sea was frequently used to show God's power over the unknown. Solomon used the sea to bring in timbers for the temple, but he made deals with other countries to have it done. King Jehoshaphat's attempt to build a Jewish navy ended in disaster after all his ships wrecked in the harbor. The Mediterranean Sea was a constant reminder of Israel's fear of the unknown. It is unfortunate that today there are millions that operate on the Mediterranean Sea level. That is what can easily be described as a level of fragile faith. They have a resemblance of faith, but it's fragile. They are afraid of the unknown or to pursue anything that has not been tried before. They are the persons who quickly say, "Pastor or Bishop, we have never done it that way before." They have witnessed many failures in the experience of others and have chosen the safe route for their future. because the safe route does not require any real faith on their part. It requires only that they stick with what they know and know what they are sticking with. But I'm reminded of what David wrote in Psalms 27:1. He said that the Lord is my light and my salvation. Then he asked the question, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Then he asked another question of whom shall I be afraid? In this season, you need to know that fear is not your friend. And even though we may not know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future, and we know who holds our hands. Oh, bless the name of the Lord. Then lastly, the Red Sea level. Well, the Red Sea represents what we have seen God do with respect to the barriers that stand between ourselves and our goals. Metaphorically, we believe God can roll back the waters, but we are not doing anything until God moves and makes the first move. Like the children of Israel, God destroys Pharaoh's will, then we leave Egypt. God opens the Red Sea, then we cross over. But not until we see it first. Those who operate on what I call the Red Sea level have a cautious faith. They believe in God to a degree, but they think it is advisable to use good sense and logic rather than completely and totally depending upon God. Yet the word is tailored to teach us that waiting on God to move first does not exemplify faith. Faith by its very nature represents the Peter in us that will prompt us to step out on the water without even giving a thought. Finally, we must consider that while some live below sea level and others operate at sea level, there are those believers that have learned to live above sea level. Living above sea level is not the same as living at or below sea level. The person who lives below sea level doesn't trust anybody or anything. The person who lives at sea level trusts only what they can see, hear, taste, smell, and feel. But the person who lives above sea level trusts completely in the Lord. Living above sea level represents the idea of living by faith and not by sight. They do not need to see to believe. Ascending from sea level to above sea level heights require an adjustment in the attitude that will affect their altitude. Those that are not accustomed to life above sea level can find themselves suffering from altitude sickness. If you ever traveled or the Alleghenies or the Colorado Mountains or the Great Smoky Mountains, you have probably noticed that as you climbed, your ears popped. At night, it was probably hard to sleep. Some had an increase in blood pressure and others found it hard to breathe. However, the people who live in those areas seem to have no problems at all. That's because they have learned how to live high above sea level. When you see a believer smiling, happy, although living under intense pressure, it's because they have learned to say, whatever I need, God will supply. When you see a believer not overwhelmed with fear, even though we're in the midst of a pandemic, and some say plandemic, that is because they believe that our God is a healer and a keeper. You see, living above sea level means living by faith and not by sight. Living above sea level means trusting in the Lord. When the three Hebrew boys stood before the fiery furnace, all their critics could see were the red-hot flames. But they lived above sea level and proclaimed, our God is able to deliver us. When Daniel faced the lion's den, all the others saw was a den full of hungry lions. But Daniel lived above sea level and knew the words of Psalms 27:5. For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle, he shall hide me. He shall set me upon a rock. Living above sea level is living by faith and not by sight. How are you living? Be blessed.